Good morning. Mara Yasser, Mendy Mirachnik, the Executive Vice President, the Igud HaRabanim, Rabbi Yaakov Klaas, and others. Before I begin, I just want to acknowledge a very distinguished member of our Rabbinical Alliance of America, Rabbi Dr. Aaron Glatt, who was honored at the White House by the President, the Vice President, to be one of those lighting the menorah. Those who were participated and assembled were executive vice presidents, executive directors, CEOs of major Jewish organizations, and one of the distinguished members of the Rabbinical Alliance, Rabbi Mendy Mirachnik, was one of those who were honored to attend the ceremony at the White House this week. So I'm speaking about Rabbi David King, as spelled, Harav David Yitzchak ben Akiva Yehuda Zecher Tzaddik Kadosh L'Bracha, a distinguished member of the Rabbinical Alliance, Igud HaRabanim, Chaplaincy Commission. And on speaking on behalf of a colleague of mine, Rabbi Daniel Kramer, and I'll mention exactly why. I and hundreds of others who found out about the sudden death of Rabbi King were in a state of shock. Toby Weiss, Assistant Vice President of the Cultural Diversity and Jewish Programming for the Metropolitan Jewish Health System, Hospice and Palliative Care, when I called to tell her that he was nifta and about the levaya, she was in shock, as so many others. She mentioned how he was so amazing in everything that he did. His collaborations with her, with hospice, with patients, also the Queens Jewish Community Council, as I will mention, and so much more. She, as a major leader and professional in her field, she recognized his greatness in all that he did. He was known in many circles through the work and relationship he had professionally and personally. We knew each other, especially as colleagues, for a long time, long before my position at the Rabbinical Alliance of America. We both were members of the Rabbinical Council of America, which I still am. I served for a period of time as the chair of the RCA Chaplaincy Committee. David was also on the RCA Chaplains Committee. Later on, he also became a member of the Rabbinical Alliance of America Chaplaincy Commission. Both of us were similar in many different areas. The similarity, as I mentioned, although he was younger than I am, but nevertheless, we had similar and cross paths in many different ways. I and my positions as executive director for Healthcare Coalition and other coalitions, and working at the United Jewish Council, East Side. So we crossed paths because he was the president of the Queens Jewish Community Council. In many ways, we conferred to different things. Then also, a year before, he received the RCA Chaplaincy, Healthcare Chaplaincy of the Year Award. I received it 1 year, a year later he received it. And Rabbi Daniel Kramer, who was the chair of the RCA Chaplaincy Committee, as well as the Orthodox Jewish Healthcare listserv, had proclaimed in front of many colleagues of the RCA the outstanding work that he did, as I shall mention in a short while. He and I conferred with each other about chaplaincy business and other mutual topics and issues. On April 26th, 2021, with the blessings of the RA Chaplaincy Commission and the RCA Chaplaincy Committee, the RCA, the RA, and the Orthodox Jewish Healthcare Chaplains Listserv hosted a Zoom conference called The Halachic Challenges of the Orthodox Healthcare Jewish Chaplain. A seminar which included Rabbi Dr. Aaron Blatt and Rabbi Herschel Welcher. David and I conferred on many issues about this conference, as I did with other members of the commission. But he was so proud that his rabbi, Rabbi Welcher, will be one of the panelists. Rabbi Welcher, of course, was proud to have and be able to confer with David as well. There are many quotes I'd like to share with you. In the RCA conference a number of years back, David and Danielle Kramer and myself discussed about having a major healthcare chaplaincy conference at New York University Langone Medical Center, of where David was a chaplain. We discussed various different aspects. He was so excited that we could have a major healthcare chaplaincy program. Unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, the conference never occurred, and to no fault of ours, it just didn't happen. But he was so excited. After we had, years later, when I mentioned the conference that we had that was on Zoom, it was nationwide, David had a great idea. He said, we couldn't have it years before, and now why can't we not join the REA, the RCA, the listserv, and let's have the conference as soon as the COVID will be over, let's have it at NYU. He was so excited that we should be able to have such a conference that he already started preparing, making proposals on who he's going to speak to of administration at NYU, that this should be a success. Unfortunately, as you know, COVID still is around. David is also not around to make this possible. Last year, I was a patient at NYU. I came into ER on Motzi Shabbos with a severe infection in my thumb which spread to the hand and wrist. ER staff tried to open the area, do what was necessary. It was too affected indeed. I ended up becoming a patient at NYU. They were concerned about the health and welfare of myself, not having sepsis. What made me proud was a respect both from the ER staff and when I was on the floor where I was a patient, how everybody had for Rabbi King. I did not seek any extra attention, nor did I tell anyone I was a rabbi, but it was tremendously rewarding to see the expressions on their faces and the respectful acknowledgments they had for Chaplain King. I was proud to say he was a colleague of mine. The Jewish patient next to me shared personal concerns. He asked if I was a rabbi and was pleasantly surprised that I was Orthodox and yet so kind and caring. I mentioned I know this chaplain who might be visiting me and asked if he would like me to request visiting him as well. Or he could ask the nursing staff. The patient replied he would rather I contact him, and I did. Rabbi King came, said hello to me, then he went to visit this patient. When Rabbi King came, he had a tremendous aura, just so special, with his smile, his sincerity. After a few kind words of introduction, as per the patient's request, I went back to my side of the room and kept the curtain pulled for privacy. But I heard some of the conversations as the patient spoke loudly. I must say how professional and caring David was with this patient. He was truly amazing. After his visit, I went with David to the nursing staff and proudly sharing how this wonderful chaplain was a colleague of mine, who I told them about prior to his visit. The nurses mentioned how grateful they were for his kindness, not just for the patients, but also for all the staff. When I returned to the room, my room, the other patient commented he did not realize before the visit that the Jewish chaplain was also a rabbi, and an Orthodox rabbi. When he was on the phone with a relative, he spoke loudly. The patient mentioned, not only was there a patient who was also a rabbi, meaning me, he had a meaningful visit by the Jewish hospital chaplain, who also happens to be a rabbi. He was amazed. The chaplain and the patient next to him, both are also Orthodox. He later told me how thankful he was that I recommended a visit by Rabbi King. What a wonderful impression he left him, and how sincere he was. The patient's anxiousness was reduced, and the blessings he received brought him a lot of comfort. What also surprised this patient was how comfortable he was speaking to Rabbi King, who is Orthodox. This patient requested another visit by Rabbi King before he was to be discharged. I also knew of his chaplaincy when he was at New York Presbyterian Hospital in Queens, also called Booth Memorial years before, and through my other non-chaplaincy positions, as I mentioned before. One of our chaplain's commission members, Rabbi Michal Chazan, who is the director of chaplaincy for Kingsbrook Jewish Medical Center, shared with me of his sweetness, David King's sweetness, and that during COVID, he was a patient at NYU. Unfortunately, chaplains weren't able to be visited all the time, but David King made every effort to be in contact and do everything that was necessary to help him. I'd just like to mention some of the quotes that I have. Rabbi Simcha Silverman, who is the director of chaplaincy for Lenox Hill Hospital in New York, shared, I do know he was a leader and a role model in the field of an Orthodox rabbi as a hospital chaplain at NYU, which is big and complex, and he navigated it masterfully. About a week before he passed away, I met someone who has a close relative that is chronically very ill and from time to time has to be hospitalized. They live in Queens. The patient goes to the New York Queens Hospital, originally called Booth Memorial, and spoke so highly of Rabbi King. His advice, his counsel, and opinion was sought by others in the field. He had an ability to look at situations in a very well-rounded way, and he did things for the right reason at the right time. This couple, whose the wife mentioned about her husband, who was chronically ill, said when they heard that Rabbi David King was leaving the hospital to go to NYU, they were absolutely scared. They were frightened. Who's going to help overlook everything that we need? Of course, a Rabbi Mendelsohn came aboard, who is actually special and wonderful chaplain as well. But this was their feelings that they had for him. Shapsi Saperstein, for the Queens Jewish League, wrote that he was a community icon, a beloved husband, father, and brother. He was known to all the chaplains of Queens. Rabbi King left an indelible mark on young and old, lecturing to school children and helping the hospital bound for 23 years at New York Presbyterian Queens as their Jewish chaplain and director of pastoral care, and also eventually at NYU, Langon's Manhattan campus. Do you know that many did not know that David King was legally blind? A lot of people did not know. When they looked at him, he looked at the person, he spoke. People did not realize that it was a little bit off. But even though vision-wise he was impaired, yet he was able to master and do unbelievable things. He was remarkable in many ways. Rabbi King, as Shapsi Saperstein continues, was known to help families during their time of need, ministering to patients, families, and staff across the Jewish spectrum, and to people of all faiths. He developed relationships with the leading rabbis in the community, as well as with clergy, all clergy. Rabbi King stood true to his goal of helping make a difficult time easier by giving each person the ministry of the moment. Rabbi King was dedicated to Congregation Avas Yisrael, the Young Israel of Kew Gardens Hills, Rabanim of Queens, and was deeply involved in many community groups, as I mentioned, the Queens Jewish Community Council, where he was a president and eventually became the vice president. Lowell Cronin, chaplain coordinator for the United States Department of Veteran Affairs. I learned earlier, today with shock and sadness, of the untimely death of my chaplain colleague for many years. Rabbi David King, for decades, he served as countless hospital patients in the needs of the Jewish community. Given his blindness, we all marveled at his ability to perform his duties as if sighted. He was devoted to Orthodox Judaism and to Torah law. He facilitated observance of mitzvot by providing sick and disabled Jewish patients with tashmid kedusha, sacred ritual objects. He didn't do so much. He brought Judaism to the bedside. That was Rabbi Lowell Cronin. Another person wrote, and you can find some of this online in the obituaries and other areas, Shavi Baron. Such a painful and terrible loss to the family and our community. Unable to physically be at the Levaya, but will live stream it and be there during Shiva. I've known the family for decades, going back to camp days with his mom and uncle. And I've known David since he joined the Queens community. He was a remarkable chaplain, rabbi, husband, father, son, brother, and a mensch. He overcame obstacles that would have defeated others. He always moved forward, doing Hashem's plan for him, and always with a smile. He will be missed by all who knew him. Rabbi Dr. Hillel Fox, a member of the Chaplaincy Commission and Director of Spiritual Services, Chaplaincy Care and Education for North Shore University Hospital. Rabbi David King and I would often consult and share with each other what we were doing for the Jewish patients, families, and staff in our hospitals. His commitment and dedication in always going with me, Meshuras Hadin, were a source of inspiration to me. His humility and his ability to overcome adversity, even with a significant visual disability, will always remain with me as an extraordinary role model. This is from Matthew Dimmick, and I just wanted to mention, he is Reverend Matthew Dimmick, member of the staff at NYU. I had the pleasure of working alongside David at NYU Langone as a fellow chaplain. I covered pediatrics, and David was always open to referrals and providing support for the families we cared for. David would often work holidays, late nights, or take unexpected calls at night for patients in need. It never surprised me to be leaving late in the day and run across him on my way out the door. I knew David best from his work as a chaplain and spiritual caregiver. I recall the excitement he had sharing with me the Passover Haggadahs he had found that were written for children and adolescents. I remember both how important it was for him to be both a rabbi for our Jewish patients and a chaplain to all people, experiencing suffering, grief, or despair at the hospital. From that relationship and our shared work at times at the NICU, I came to learn about his own children. He spoke with love and pride of them, their travel to Israel, raising twins, and his own experiences as a parent in a hospital setting. My heart breaks for his family. I'm still in disbelief he is gone. I catch myself expecting to see him round a corner or show up at our staff huddles. There is an absence, an emptiness here without our rabbi. I wish I could have been able to tell him goodbye and how much he missed. Thank you, David, for all you gave of yourself, for your humor, and for your heart of compassion. This came from an Elizabeth Tamura, a chaplain at NYU Langone. Rabbi King and I spoke nearly every day at work since COVID began, as we navigated the many changes and difficult times faced by our patients, families, and staff. He was a fountain of giving that never ran dry, and I am deeply grateful for his friendship. I tried to write one memory and erased every single one because there are just too many to share. David, you are cherished and you will be deeply missed. You and your beloved family are in my prayers. Alex Wittenberg. Some years ago, on the 7th day of Pesach, my wife needed to be rushed to New York Hospital in Queens. for a necessary outpatient procedure. Finding Rabbi King there on a Chag and getting his help was so reassuring. He made sure we'd have a cab home so my wife could recover in her own bed. A small thing that took away so much worry. But beyond that, he was such a special man, such an inspiration, overcoming so much and serving Klal Yisrael at great sacrifice to himself, his wife, his career, and such a Kiddush Hashem. May his loved ones know no more sorrow. Shoshana Sanders. Rabbi King was always available and helpful whenever we had a family member at the hospital, making sure that our loved ones had everything they needed for Shabbos and Yom Tov. And he attended to all their spiritual needs. For years, I would always see him walking over there on Shabbos. He was a very special and dedicated person who went above and beyond for patients and their families. From Rabbi Sifania Krieger, who was a chaplain at Columbia University Medical Center. Rabbi King was known through the Queens area, the entire Queens area. While at Booth, and later on New York Queens Hospital, he was responsible for raising the awareness of the needs of the Frum community. He was responsible for many things to help us. A Jewish chapel with a Sefer Torah, a regular door for people to be able to enter and exit on Shabbos without a problem. He educated staff about kashrus and protocol in the event of the death of a Jewish patient. The list goes on and on. Mostly, I will miss him as a friend. Yes, I have one more, and this is from also Rabbi Yochanan Ivri, who is the rabbi, by the way, at Congregation Torah's MS of Staten Island. He's also a chaplain for Caring Hospice of New York. I worked with Rabbi King as a hospice chaplain who visited patients at the New York Queens Hospital, formerly known as Booth Memorial. Rabbi King was always able to assist me with patient information, and when I was not able to make a visit, he generously gave of his time to visit any patient in need. I distinctly recall the time when we jointly made a visit with a Frum hospice patient at the hospital with a family Rav, who recited Vidui for the dying patient. Rabbi King gave the utmost kavod to the Rav and was very empathetic as he assisted the family with the patient's end-of-life needs and funeral planning. The last time I met Rabbi King was around Sukkot time in Borough Park. He was with his son, who he introduced, and shared that they were preparing for his trip to Eretz Yisrael, where he would be studying for the year. The genuine pride he has for his son was quite evident. I understood right there that although Rabbi King was an accomplished and top-notch chaplain, he always made sure that his family was his first priority, and he understood that they were his true source of Yiddish knowledge. I have to say, I could go on and on. It's endless. There's so many things, both Jewish and non-Jewish chaplains, patients, and others had to share about him, as I mentioned just before. You know, Rabbi King just represented, you know, we have Jewish chaplains who are not just healthcare chaplains. We have chaplains in correctional facilities, we have police, we have others. And some of them are members of the RAA, some RCAs, others with the Orthodox Jewish Health Listserv. And Rabbi Kramer and I, we confer many times about doing various things. And in fact, I have a program coming up this Tuesday. And the program is Ask for Therapists, which I hope that many of the members will be joining. And it just shows that people who thought that a chaplain was just a person in a hospital who brought around, you know, religious articles, made him a shaver. What I read to you and shared with you, Rabbi David King was a par excellent individual. You should know that before he died, which was very sudden, he asked me, he says, you know, he says, Rabbi Blank, everybody calls me Rabbi Blank. I tell him, call me Yehuda, call me Leonard. Now it's always Rabbi Blank. He says, I have to give you derech eretz, I have to give you respect. He says, you know, there's a position that's available, a very distinguished position. It's not a chaplaincy. And I'd like to recommend you. That's the way he was. He was thinking of so many people in so many different ways. We at the Rabbinical Alliance of America are at a tremendous loss because Rabbi King was a distinguished member of the Chaplaincy Commission. He's a loss for the Rabbinical Council of America. He's a loss for the Orthodox Jewish chaplain listserv. But more than that, it's a tremendous loss for Klal Yisrael. As I've written many times in my articles, the importance of being an ambassador for Klal Yisrael and mostly Hashem. And he was very, very makbid on being the Kaddish Hashem in so many ways. He was a remarkable ambassador for Klal Yisrael in many different ways. He will be sorely missed. He should be a Melis Yosha for his dear wife, a wonderful, wonderful Ashes Chayil, and his family he loved so much. He should be a Melis Yosha for Klal Yisrael, for all of us. And one more thing, we realized that if anybody ever wanted to know that a person could be a professional in many different ways, he was a musbach, by the way, of many yeshivos, including Yeshiva University, Yitzchak Echana, and he had smicha. He learned Torah. He had a seder every week. Nothing fazed him. He found time for everything. Maybe she should bench his wife. He should have Zichas Yom Tov and his family. And we should all be Zeicher, the Jewish Leila, the Karav, and Thank you.
Amen.